Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on Hindutva versus Hinduism and the advent of Hindutva in American politics. We have a very important guest today, Pieter Friedrich. But before we introduce him, I want to spend a little bit time. By the way, I'm Raju Rajugopal of Hindus for Human Rights. Uh, I want to address the first part of the discussion today by a personal summary of what I feel are the differences between Hindutva and Hinduism as I have known it. Uh, I'll then introduce Peter, and he will talk more about the advent of Hindutva in American politics for about 20 minutes, followed by Q&A, which you can post in the chat room. But our request is to be brief. Make sure it is actually a question relevant to today's topic. And please avoid comments or anything else outside of this topic of today. Either Peter or myself will answer the questions as they're asked. My colleague Sunita will be asking the question from the chat room. And sometimes if there are repeated questions, she may combine them. So with that, let me share my views on where we are today with Hindutva versus Hinduism. As many of you know, the word Hindutva is 95 years old, coined by V.D. Savarkar, who founded Hindu Mahasabha. Hindutva literally means Hinduness. You know, who can object to it? I'm a Hindu. I have nothing against Hinduness. But the reality is, its very foundation invites aggression and hate. And today, Hindutva rule fits most of the criteria for fascism. In my presentation that I will share with you separately, I elaborate on that a little bit more. For over 67 years, India had managed somehow to contain this particular virus. But yet today, more and more people are beginning to believe that Hinduism and Hindutva are really one and the same. How did that happen? So let me take a moment to talk about what I call it the three I's. What has made that turn happen, in my view, are one, ideology. The first ideology being RSS Shaka that have diligently worked for several decades to drill into young minds several issues, including restating the tragedy of partition. Muslims are an existential threat to Hindus, relentlessly attacking so-called secularists and Congress party. The second I is the international events, rise of terrorism and Islamophobia in the rest of the world. And of course, in our own country, the advent of Trump has certainly helped move forward the Hindutva agenda significantly in the last few years. And the last I is the IT strategy, where they've smartly deployed IT, and they were leagues ahead perhaps of the Russian trolls in the way they have used WhatsApp and in the way they have used the Narendra Modi app and so forth, where the BJP IT cell has become one of the largest purveyors of fake news and trolls. We can go into each of these in more detail, but today let me simply move on to where I see my Hinduism, Sunita's Hinduism, and the Hinduism of so many millions of people differs and starkly contrasts with today's Hindutva. Hindutva abounds in Hinduism abounds in stories of inclusiveness, kindness, and compassion, whereas Hindutva propagates fear, insecurity, exclusiveness, and hatred for the minorities. Hinduism of my times welcomes other faiths and traditions, whereas Hindutva's very foundation is disdain for Islam and Christianity. Hinduism's bhakti has no room for hate, but as we have seen repeatedly, BJP RSS sham bhakti is built on triumphalism against other religions. Hinduism respects numerous pathways to God and rejects the need for a Hindu papacy, whereas BHP and RSS are trying their best to create a theocracy with a homogeneous Hinduism. Hinduism teaches equality of Shiva and Shakti, the male and the female energies. Hindutva is patriarchal and regressive on gender rights. Now, Hinduism teaches ahimsa as a core value, a legacy strengthened by Buddhism that it has absorbed, whereas Hindutva glorifies violence and revenge, as we have seen repeatedly in recent months. Hinduism, the birthplace of nonviolence and civil disobedience, whereas Hindutva mocks nonviolence. Hinduism believes in a secular polity where faith is a private matter. Hindutva is moving ahead at warp speed with a majoritarian Hindu state where others will be second-class citizens. Hinduism has had many role models in the past who have spoken of annihilation of the shameful legacy of the caste system, but we have a long, long way to go in accomplishing what some people have tried and failed. But I think the time is now for Hinduism to focus on that as well. But Hindutva, on the other hand, has been merely doing PR with respect to Dalits, and annihilation of caste is nowhere on its agenda. So that's a very quick summary of how I feel about Hindutva and Hinduism. I think everybody has a spectrum of views on this, but it is important for us to recognize, especially those who are now trying to tell you that Hindutva is simply another version of Hinduism, for you to challenge them if you believe in some of the things that I have said. So I'll end with that. And it's a great pleasure this afternoon, to invite Pieter. I met Pieter Friedrich for the first time in front of the Indian consulate in San Francisco during the anti-CAA protests a few months ago. I still remember his passionate words that day about the imminent danger of fascism in India. I thought I had made a passionate speech, but he exceeded my passion that day. I still remember that very distinctly. Then I found out that he was a freelance journalist focusing on South Asian affairs for many years, and who was largely responsible for exposing Tulsi Gabbard's close connections with the Hindu nationalist groups. It is his expose that had prompted Representative Ro Khanna to tweet that Hinduism of his grandfather was not today's Hindutva, which of course created a storm in the Hindutva-dominated Silicon Valley. And now I have read a similar investigative report by him on the aspiring congressional candidate from Houston, Sri Preston Kulkarni, which I'm sure he will elaborate upon in his remarks. Pieter has devoted the last few years of his work on the rise of Hindutva in India and its parallel rise in America. He is the author of several books, and in the current context, his detailed expose of Tulsi Gabbard in the Caravan magazine was a major contribution to the ongoing conversations on Hindutva. Pieter will be talking today about his continuing work on the increasing political activity by the Hindu nationalist lobby, and will hopefully give us some pointers on how we too can contribute to bringing to mainstream America's attention that white nationalism is not the only threat to democracy, and that they should pay close attention to Hindu nationalists who speak with a forked tongue, so to speak, the message of multiculturalism and minority rights here, at the same time supporting an authoritarian regime in India. Pieter will speak for about 20 minutes, as I mentioned, and I will start with Q&A with a couple of questions, then we'll take questions from the chat room. So with that, it is my great pleasure, Pieter, to introduce you to our audience this afternoon. Unmute. Urmila, can you unmute Pieter, please?
All right.
There you go.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that kind introduction. So without further ado, in October of last year, Hillary Clinton made headlines for Tulsi Gabbard when she accused the Congresswoman from Hawaii of being a favorite of the Russians and suggested that Gabbard was being groomed by Russia to run for president on a third-party ticket. Tulsi Gabbard, who was then running for president, initially benefited from the attention. She filed a $50 million defamation lawsuit, and she got into a spat with Clinton, calling her the queen of warmongers and all sorts of other things, all of which was widely reported on. Less than a week later, however, a different story emerged. Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, a national media watchdog group which is based in New York City, issued the results of its investigation of the issue, concluding that the Russia accusations were a distraction from Gabbard's actual troubling ties. There is no evidence that Gabbard is any kind of a Russian agent plucked by Moscow to sway the 2020 election toward the re-election of Donald Trump, they reported. These hit jobs, they said, overlooked the proven fact of the RSS's influence on Gabbard, despite the evidence that this is much more a part of her life than Russian intrigue. The key takeaway from piles of evidence, they explained, is that the RSS draws much of its power from its followers in the diaspora, and Gabbard has been crucial to revamping the image of the Hindu nationalist in the United States, and has in turn received crucial financial support from the Indian American far right. The RSS, briefly for those who may be unaware, is a uniformed and armed paramilitary which has an estimated 6 million members. Founded in 1925, it developed with inspiration from, and even actual interactions with, the European fascist movements in Italy and Germany. Over the past 95 years, it has spawned a host of subsidiary and affiliated organizations. And these include, in particular, a religious wing called the VHP and a political wing called the BJP. The BJP has ruled India since 2014, with Modi as Prime Minister. But the current administration is most accurately understood as an RSS regime. Nearly 75% of the central government's current cabinet ministers are from RSS backgrounds. And this includes not just Modi himself, but also those ministers who fill many of the most important positions, including the ministries of Home, Defense, Education, Communications, and Law and Justice. In context of American politics, it's notable that the RSS has not confined itself to India. There are international counterparts for the RSS, called the HSS, the VHP, called VHP America, and the BJP, called the Overseas Friends of BJP. These groups all espouse the same ideology of Hindutva, a religious nationalist political ideology that believes that India is a Hindu nation for Hindu people only, and wants to eliminate all Muslims and Christians, as well as assimilate all Buddhists and Sikhs. The leadership of these American Hindutva groups, the HSS, VHP America, and OFBJP, are all intertwined, and many of the executives of one group hold or have held an executive position in one or more of the other groups. The OFBJP was launched in America in 1992 in order to counter negative press surrounding the Hindu nationalist project to destroy the Babri Masjid in Ayodhya, Uttar Pradesh. They say their goal is to project a positive and correct image of India in the West and correct any distortions in media coverage. And they work hand in glove with BJP leadership back in India. The former head of the group, Indian politician Vijay Jolly, said, "We need to touch base with as many among the diaspora as possible and to indoctrinate them with the BJP ideology." For years leading up to Modi's election in 2014, Jolly toured the US to speak at diaspora rallies and to meet American politicians. Tulsi Gabbard was one of those politicians. There is a now infamous image of Tulsi Gabbard wearing a saffron scarf with the BJP logo. In other words, a picture of an American congresswoman wearing the colors of a foreign political party, while speaking at an OFBJP banquet held in Atlanta to celebrate Modi's election. While speaking at the banquet, VJ Jolly raised the eyebrows of many, like myself, who would later hear his words when he told Gabbard, who was then running for re-election to a second term, and I quote, "We are sure, with the support of the people of Indian origin, the non-resident Indians, and of course, the US citizens, your victory later this year is a foregone conclusion. I'm predicting today for your victory." Does that smack of foreign interference? It seems so, especially when one considers that at 3 separate OFBJP banquets celebrating Modi's victory, speakers who were donors to Gabbard's campaign publicly applauded her for supporting Modi before he was elected, for speaking against the US decision to deny him a visa after 2002, and for working against congressional efforts to recognize and condemn violent atrocities committed by the RSS in India. The Song in America backed Tulsi Gabbard because they understand that the international community is increasingly worried about the sectarian, violent politics of the Song in India, explained Professor Ashok Swain. They want some powerful political personalities on their side, particularly in the United States. They believe Tulsi can be one of them, who can provide them cover from international sanctions. And that plan worked pretty well for several years, but it ultimately failed. One day after the fairness and accuracy in reporting, after the group, Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, rubbished Hillary Clinton's Russian asset accusations, reporting instead that Gabbard's most troubling attribute is her documented connection to the far-right Hindu nationalist or Hindutva movement known as RSS, the 4-term Congresswoman announced that she would not seek re-election. She did continue her presidential campaign, but she never gained traction and had to deal on the campaign trail with being challenged over using congressional campaign funds to help finance the very same OFBJP banquet where an Indian politician guaranteed her re-election. And she has now dropped out. It appears that Tulsi Gabbard will soon be exiting the American political arena, despite the best efforts of the Hindutva lobby in America. There continue to be troubling incidents of BJP interference or threatened interference in American politics, however. Last year, for instance, a few days after the August 5th annexation of Kashmir, Congressman Tom Suozzi sent a letter to the US Secretary of State expressing concern and warning, quote, "The Modi government's move could embolden Hindu nationalists to engage in acts of violence and discrimination against India's minority religious groups, including Muslims, Christians, and Sikhs." The congressman's letter provoked fury from a man named Jagdish Suwani, reportedly an RSS officer or Karyakarta, a community outreach coordinator for the HSS, former general secretary of the OFBJP, and a close associate of Modi, who traveled from New York City to Gujarat in 2014 to be part of Modi's campaign team, and in his own words, privy to the brainstorming sessions during the campaign. Suwani is also the man who organized the controversial display in Times Square of the groundbreaking ceremony for Ram Mandir, which we saw happen just a few days ago. Infuriated by Suozzi's letter on behalf of human rights in India, Suwani took Congressman's arm, apparently by leveraging the important role of his Indian American donors, and pressured him to retract the letter, apologize, and join a community meeting where he harangued Suozzi for the tone and tenor of the letter. Another More recent and even more blatant example of Hindutva interference in American politics came when Senator Bernie Sanders issued a tweet condemning the Delhi pogrom in February of this year as a failure of leadership on human rights. In response, a BJP National General Secretary tweeted, "How much ever neutral we wish to be, you compel us to play a role in presidential elections." Meanwhile, as Gabbard appears destined to disappear from the scene, the Hindutva lobby is hard at work supporting at least 6 politicians, 3 who are already in office, and 3 who are trying to get into office. One of those, although in a somewhat more covert manner, is Congressman Ami Bera in California. A member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Ami Bera was recently appointed chair of the Subcommittee on Asia, which means he is now the most powerful person in the House of Representatives when it comes to US foreign policy on India. Modi has earned his applause. Bera praises Modi's inspirational words and vision, for instance. And besides joining 2 of Modi's rockstar receptions in America, which were organized by the Hindutva lobby, he was instrumental in arranging Modi's address to a joint meeting of Congress in 2016. His campaign finances boast large recurring donations from the same key figures in the American Hindutva groups who backed Tulsi Gabbard. Another, to a much more overt degree, is Congressman Raju Krishnamurti in Illinois. In 2018, despite huge pressure from his constituents and other concerned citizens, he attended an event organized by the VHP America and shared the stage with Mohan Bhagwat, the chief of the RSS. In 2019, he was the keynote speaker at a fundraiser in Texas for Seva International, which is the international wing of Seva Bharati, a social service organization affiliated with the RSS. At that event, he was joined on stage by Ramesh Bhutada, the vice president of the HSS. And weeks later, he joined Modi on stage in Houston, Texas, at the Howdy Modi Rockstar reception. And then he was the keynote speaker at an HSS event in Chicago, which was organized specifically to celebrate the founding of the RSS. With so much willingness to carry water for Hindutva groups, it's no surprise that they have padded the coffers of Krishnamurti's campaigns. And yet another is Michigan State Representative Padma Kupa. Kupa has written extensively through a Hindutva lens. She blames Western bias for attacks on Hindu nationalism, complains that too many media reports are making the 2002 Gujarat pogrom the centerpiece of coverage about Modi, supports anti-conversion laws in India, which make it a criminal offense to change religions without government permission, criticizes non-Muslim women who wear hijab as a sign of solidarity, and quotes the raging Islamophobe Conrad Elst, a European author who says that Islam is reprehensible and insists, quote, "The liberation of the Muslims from Islam should be a top priority for all those who care about India's and the world's future." Of these 3 who are currently in office, Bera and Krishnamurti both appear secure and relatively unchallenged for the moment. But Kupa, who was first elected in 2018, is currently seeking a second term and quite possibly harbors ambitions for a seat in Congress. And she deserves a great deal of attention because of these reasons. Turning to the 3 candidates who are currently seeking office, there is Rishi Kumar, who is running for Congress in California. And Kumar is a city councilor in Saratoga, California, with a long track record of activism with the OFBJP. Writing about, in 2015, he helped organize Modi's Rockstar reception in San Jose. And writing about his experience, he waxed eloquent about waiting to meet, quote, the man, the myth, the legend, well, Modi fever took over the region. He further described how Modi is who I seek to emulate in my governance on the city council. Last year, while wearing a BJP scarf, he spoke at an OFBJP event hosted to organize support for Modi's re-election, one of several OFBJP events he has participated in over the years. Also in California is Ritesh Tandon, who proudly declares, "My father was a strong RSS person." Tandon is running against Congressman Ro Khanna, and his decision to run for office, he says, was motivated by Khanna's criticism of Hindutva. In August 2019, Congressman Khanna charted a new course for the Indian American diaspora when he commented on reportage about Tulsi Gabbard's RSS links, stating, quote, "It's the duty of every American politician of Hindu faith to stand for pluralism, reject Hindutva, and speak for equal rights for Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, Buddhists, and Christians." As Amar Singh Shergill, the chair of the California Democratic Party Progressive Caucus, wrote, "Khanna's statement incited a torrent of hate and criticism from pro-Hindutva and pro-India political supporters, balanced by progressives and anti-Hindutva activists heralding his courageous stance." Shergill concluded, "In the coming months, we will see a debate within the South Asian American community and the Democratic Party regarding the morality of Hindutva and how the party can reach consensus given the political crisis in India." That debate has begun to rage, particularly in regards to the third candidate who is currently seeking office, Shri Preston Kulkarni, who is running for Congress in Houston, Texas. Understanding the extent of the influence which the Hindutva lobby has on Kulkarni's campaign requires understanding Ramesh Buttada. As mentioned, Ramesh Buttada is vice president of HSS. He is also the founder of the first HSS chapter in Houston. His cousin-in-law, Vijay Palod, who claims to be the man who discovered Kulkarni, describes seeing a steady stream of RSS workers at Buttada's house over the years. And among those appears to be RSS chief Mohan Bhagwat, who, as Palod himself actually told me, has been hosted and stayed at the home of Buttada on at least one occasion, if not more. In 2010, Ramesh Buttada traveled to an HSS summit in India, where, while wearing the uniform of the RSS, he listened to Mohan Bhagwat declare that India, quote, "alone has the capacity to save the world and humanity." In 2011, Buttada organized an OFBJP training camp in Houston for activists, which was conducted by the political advisor to the man who was then president of the BJP. In 2014, Buttada organized a phone bank in Houston of 700 people who worked, quote, "round the clock," making calls, quote, "to motivate voters in India to vote for the BJP. Later, when Modi won election, Buttada wrote that it was because of Modi's RSS training and claimed that Modi's upbringing and the culture of the RSS meant that critics should revisit the RSS. In 2015, as one of Tulsi Gabbard's top donors over the years, he attended her relatively small wedding in Hawaii, where he was joined by RSS spokesperson turned BJP spokesperson Ram Madhav. In 2019, he, along with his son and his brother-in-law, was a key organizer for the Howdy Modi Rockstar reception in Houston. And Ramesh Buttada is also a key organizer and donor and fundraiser for Sri Preston Kulkarni's campaign for Congress. In this campaign, Rameshji has become like my father, Kulkarni said during his first attempt at winning election. According to Bhuttada's cousin-in-law, Ramesh met with community stalwarts, regardless of their party affiliation, to bring their financial power to help Kulkarni. Last year, when Kulkarni launched his second campaign for Congress, Buttada, who was described as having a strong emotional bond with the candidate, was one of the major speakers at the event. Along with his time and energy, Buttada has poured his treasure into getting Kulkarni elected. In total, along with his immediate family members, he has donated over $50,000 to Kulkarni's campaigns. At least $50,000 more has been donated to Kulkarni's campaign by just 7 other individuals and their families who are known as key executives in Hindutva groups in America. And the extent of Kulkarni's financing by Hindutva groups deserves a far deeper dive. But one thing remains apparent. Buttada is pulling the strings of Kulkarni's campaign. Of the 3 RSS-linked candidates who are currently seeking office, neither Rishi Kumar nor Ritesh Tandon in California appear to stand much chance at all of winning. Kulkarni, on the other hand, is in one of the most competitive and closely watched races in the country. As rumors reach me, the Kulkarni, who has had a lengthy career in the Foreign Service, is interested in being assigned to the Foreign Affairs Committee if elected. I can only speculate about what kind of agenda he would adopt on the issue of US-India relations as the Modi regime spreads its fascist wings and implements its Hindutva ideology, increasingly lethal results. As Americans remain deeply concerned about the possibility of foreign interference in our elections by Russia or China, perhaps it's time, or rather well past time, that we begin also considering the issue of RSS interference on behalf of a Hindutva regime in India. Thank you.
Raju, do you want to unmute yourself and say a few words before I go into Q&A?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Peter. That was extremely informative speech. I'm sure for most of us, the extent to which you have gone in researching all of this should be an inspiration for all of us who want to stop the march of Hindutva to apply ourselves to similar investigation wherever we live and to make people aware, our local Congress people aware of the second nationalism that's on the rise, which can threaten the entire world. That is, I don't know what else to say other than to say that was a great coverage of your research. And I'm sure you have inspired today many people who are listening to also pitch in and add to your effort. I had 1 or 2 questions for you before we open up the Q&A. You had mentioned Raja Krishnamurti. I've had several conversations with him over the last year. And one of the things that he has told me that is that his topmost priority is defeating Trump. Therefore, 95% of his effort is going into that. And he's not really that engaged with Indian politics. But at the same time, he wants to, quote unquote, keep his constituency and donor base intact so he can defeat Trump. Now, I read a lot into that, and for someone who knows his politics better than I do, I wonder if you would comment on that comeback where uh, somehow it's seen as defeating Trump means that one can claim complete ignorance of and completely forget about what is happening, especially when, as you say, he has been at so many presentations by BJP and HSS where clearly what he told me rings very hollow. Thank you. Hope can answer that.
Thank you, Raju. Yes. Well, if Congressman Krishnamurti is saying that he's not really engaged with Indian politics, then I don't know what else to respond except that that comes across to me as a rather blatant lie. Perhaps within Congress, he might argue that, although his voting record would indicate otherwise. As far as the way that he supported advancing a very deep and intimate U.S.-India relationship while India remains under the Modi regime, and then of course his long track record of involvement in these RSS affiliated events and with these RSS organizations really speaks otherwise. If he's not involved, then one should perhaps question if he's simply accepting these invitations out of total ignorance. And if that were the case, well, that's not a very good reason, because then I wouldn't be willing to put a lot of trust in a congressman who's completely ignorant about the organizations with which he's involving himself. As far as the Trump issue, that also doesn't make a lot of sense. Perhaps Congressman Krishnamurti, who was out of, at the time, 4 Indian American representatives in the House, I believe, and the only one who attended Howdy Modi in Houston. Perhaps he missed that Trump was the chief guest there aside from Modi. Perhaps he missed that Modi and Trump did this dance of love around the stadium afterwards, and that Modi basically said that he supported Trump's reelection. Perhaps he's missed the way that then Howdy Modi was essentially replicated in India a few months later, when Trump went to visit India, and there was another rockstar reception for Trump hosted there in India, where Modi joined him on stage. Trump and Modi are very, very closely aligned. So the argument that he's focused on defeating Trump and therefore he must ignore Modi doesn't hold any water. And then additionally, I would add to that if he's truly concerned about issues of white nationalism growing in America, especially under the Trump administration, that he, like anybody else, should be concerned as well about Hindu nationalism. Hindu nationalism and white nationalism are kissing cousins. The Hindu nationalist movement has a long track record of interaction with white nationalists in the present day, as well as with the original European fascist movements, like not in Nazi Germany and in fascist Italy. And they also very, very much share ideology. Their ideology is, in a lot of ways, mirrors each other. So that just doesn't make any sense to me, that the congressman would have an answer like that for you.
Thank you. My second question is, with the work that you're doing related to Hindutva, how do you make sure that you are safe? Are you concerned for your own safety at times? I think that's something that many people hearing you would probably want to know, how you deal with this on a day-to-day basis.
Well, this is sensitive work. I have had a lot of people very angry at me. In my daily life, I attempt to be discreet. And I would say, I guess, in overall, simply look to my faith and just have courage that I'm doing the right thing, and I don't need to be anxious or worried about what happens to me because I do it. Although I do take proper precautions as necessary. Yes, I have had a few issues when I was in Houston opposing Howdy Modi. Um, I did have I had people trying to report me to the FBI for opposing Howdy Modi on social media and that sort of thing. I've had here and there a few fairly overt death threats on social media, none of which seems serious enough to take seriously, but I have had that. The main thing that I've had actually is I've been physically protested by the HSS here in California, which is my home state, in the Bay Area in Congressman Ro Khanna's district, about a month or so after he issued this statement condemning, denouncing Hindutva. The HSS organized a protest, I think of about 30 people or so, outside of one of his town halls. And they were protesting his statement, but they were protesting his statement with banners with pictures of my face on it. So that was it was in a lot of ways a sign that I'm on the right track and I'm doing the right thing. So in some ways it was encouraging. At the same time, it's a little bit scary.
Thank you, Peter. If I may now pass on the baton to Sunita to ask questions from the audience.
Yes, thank you both, Peter, Raju, for your enlightening presentations and grounding in what's right, and also for your courage, truly. I'm going to just, we have a lot of questions. It's now 1:47, well, where I am, it's 1:47. It's 3:47 Eastern. Can we go for about 20 minutes or so with Q&A? Are you both okay with that, Raju, Peter?
Yes. Yes.
Oh. Okay, so there's one question that came by email, which I'm going to read out. It's from Sumbela Zeb, who is also with us. Sumbela also joined us on this Zoom call. The question is, as a South Asian American, she's very happy to see other South Asian Americans get involved, but I won't support a candidate who takes money from RSS affiliates and who doesn't openly condemn the government and atrocities of the Modi regime. When we ask about this, we are told we are being racist. How can Hindu American candidates expect Muslim American support when they respond to our concerns in such a way?
Peter,
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'm very familiar with that. I'm routinely accused of being racist because I'm routinely accused of being a Hinduphobe because I speak out, oppose Hindu nationalism, which, as Raju has very eloquently explained, is entirely distinct from the Hindu religion. And as far as the question, one thing I would say is that one should consider that simply because a congressional candidate or any politician takes money from people who have ties to these Hindutva groups does not necessarily mean that that person is being supported by Hindutva, being propped up by them. Anybody can donate to any politician. Any of us can go to their campaign website today and give them money. But when you start to see this long track record where large amounts recurring over multiple campaigns are being given to these people, when you start to see, as in the case of Sri Preston Kulkarni in Houston, that these Hindutva figures, these who are executives, they're not just open or amenable to Hindutva issues, but they're actually executives in organized Hindutva groups in America who have strong connections back to India. when you start to see these figures take center stage in the campaigns of candidates, then it becomes a major cause for concern. And you know, in some ways, I don't know. It's such an irrational argument, an irrational response to accuse somebody of being racist because they oppose what is an intrinsically racist supremacist movement, and they oppose people, congressional candidates, politicians being involved with that or being in any way connected to that. And so I think what I tend to do is I just continue forging ahead and just realize that, well, that argument has no real rational basis, and just take confidence in the fact that you are in the right, you're standing for justice, for equality, and take that confidence and use it in your interactions with people as you're attempting to make these arguments about these politicians.
Thank you, Peter. I think that goes for all of us doing this work. That's really, really helpful. The next question is from Mohammed Nomani. And Mohammed asks, US has not done anything effective against CCP-run Chinese aggression on Uyghurs until recently. How can we say that this will not be the same with RSS-run India?
Well, that's a great question. And I think that to a large extent, we cannot depend on the US government itself to be the driving force behind taking action on these issues. This has to be done on a grassroots level by individuals, by individual politicians. As far as a formal government policy, the US has, for a long time now, and increasingly so these days, but for a long time now, has lacked the moral standing to stand up and speak out against these violations of human rights around the world, whether it's in India or China or elsewhere. And I would attribute that personally to the fact that the US has been engaged in these foreign wars of aggression overseas for decades. You know, even tracing back to the Vietnam War, how can the US be involved in Vietnam, bombing innocents, conducting the My Lai massacre, killing people in Laos and Cambodia as they're conducting the war in Vietnam? How can they be involved in that at the same time they have any moral authority to speak out on against atrocities being committed by other states in the world? And so today, I would say that what we really need to do is move away from a dependence and expectation that that is going to be how we affect change and how we make an impact.
Thank you. There are a number of questions that sort of echo each other. They're about the details of these donations received by Kulkarni. There's a question, how can we follow the money? There's somebody asking if you will write an article that lays all of this out so that it can be used, you know, for education and also advocacy. And just a moment, I'm Urmila, can you make sure nobody is showing videos, please?
Yes.
Thank you. So the question is, how can we get details on donations received by Kulkarni from RSS-connected individuals? Another question, how can we follow the money? Asad Khan says, how can we find how much foreign money from India is being donated to these candidates, and is that legal? So these are the questions, there's more like that as well, if you could address.
Regarding the question of foreign money being donated, that's a good question. In the case of Tulsi Gabbard, actually a number of people who were supporting her very vociferously argued that because there was no record of her receiving foreign donations, because all of the donations that have been called out were donations by American citizens, which you do have to be an American citizen to donate, that therefore the argument that she was being propped up by these Hindutva groups was not valid, that she had these RSS links was not valid, which is of course not the case. But I've never made that allegation about Tulsi Gabbard. I'm not making that allegation currently about Kulkarni. I have no proof that there's any foreign money being put into their campaigns. What there is proof of is that there is a long track record of what appear to be targeted donations, with oftentimes immediate family members all giving maximum amounts at the same time to these candidates. For donations coming from these people who are executives, top leadership in these American Hindutva groups. Now, as far as how to track that, all of this is public information. It's available through the Federal Elections Commission website. And it takes a few minutes to figure out how to use it, but it's pretty self-explanatory for how to search for a candidate and then how to search for a specific individual who's given to that candidate, or you can even download the entire list of people that have ever given to that candidate and how much and when and where, all of that. Anyways, as far as tracking the RSS affiliated individuals who are giving, that takes digging, that takes a lot of legwork, because you have to know who they are. If you don't know who they are, then they're just random names on a list of donors. In the case of, for instance, Ramesh Butata, he is very clearly identifiable as a top executive in the American song who's deeply tied to RSS BJP back in India, and who was incredibly active with the OFBJP's campaign here in America to support Modi's election in India, which, as an aside, I think is an issue which deserves deep examination within the American political arena, as far as how these American citizens are spending so much time to get politicians in India elected. And from the India side, I think Indians need to start looking at this and being concerned about it and questioning if they want all of these American citizens, many of whom were either born in America or immigrated to America and ended up renouncing their Indian citizenship. I think Indians need to start looking at this and taking up the issue and asking if they really want that kind of interference in their elections coming from America. So as far as tracking these RSS donations, it takes some legwork, because you really have to know who these people are, and if you don't already, then it takes some time to identify them. Mm-hmm. But good, and so that is a good starting point.
Thanks, Peter. This question from Habib Syed, I think you've in part answered. He asks, what measures is the US government taking to kill politicization of fascist ideology in the US and throughout the world? I think you've already sort of stated that Trump is already aligned with Modi and that grassroots efforts will help, but in case you want to add something to that. And also Victor Beg is asking, we're working in Michigan to unseat Padma. Can you write a piece about her as you wrote about Tulsi? It'll help us.
And that reminds me of an earlier question, which I believe I missed. I have already written a short piece about Kulkarni, which was just the outcome of my initial investigation into him, which I intend to continue. And that is available. That is available on my Medium account, and has been shared through my social media accounts. And as far as writing about Padma, yes, I think she should be written about. I would be very interested in taking that up. She is, as I mentioned, among these candidates and those already in office and those seeking election. She's one of the ones that I think that she most likely has higher ambitions for Congress, and she deserves greater attention. The politicization of fascism. Well, I mean, fascism is a political ideology. As far as what can be done about that in the U.S., that's the challenge of our times, isn't it? We are struggling with that in America right now. We are struggling with federal troops basically on the streets around in different countries, being accused of snatching people off the streets, abducting them. You know, we've seen that in India over some decades, where people have been disappeared and murdered in custody after being disappeared. And thankfully, that doesn't sound like it's happening here in the U.S. yet. But you know, Trump at the top, Trump is aligned with Modi. Trump has been, you know, dog whistling for white nationalism, and nothing can be expected from him as far as opposition to fascism, because the problem is that he's leaning in that direction. We need to stand up, and we need to stop looking to other people to do something for us. And I think we need to stand up and take some personal responsibility, and you know, really inculcate these issues. If decide if we are actually passionate and actually against fascism and anti-fascist, and if that's something that we truly believe in, we need to take personal responsibility for standing up, speaking out, and doing something.
Yes. Question from Raziuddin Syed, who appreciates our efforts and asks, who observes that a big percentage of Hindus are brought into the Hindutva ideology and think it's a part of Hinduism. Maybe Raju can also speak on this. And this questioner goes as far as saying that an overwhelming majority is in the boat of Hindutva. And so how can we work together to reverse that tide?
Well, I would prefer to turn that over to Raju.
Yeah, it's a good question. I tend not to believe in the theory that a majority of Hindus are subscribed to Hindutva, because I interact with my own relatives and friends who are every bit liberal in many ways. And there's a lot of reasons they're supporting Modi, and a lot of it also has to do with the extraordinarily strong public relations program that Modi has been undertaking. So I do not want to start with the assumption that a majority are with Hindutva. They may be with BJP or Modi for many, many reasons. How we can work together, I think we should stop worrying about how many people are with us and simply do our bit, which is what Hindus for Human Rights has been doing. And we were just 6 people who started this. And many people told us, you're not going to get anywhere. You're going to be rejected by the left. You're going to be rejected by Dalit groups. You're going to be, of course, trolled by the right wing. But what do? We can't just sit there and say we can't do anything. So we have started this effort, and it is taking hold. It is creating image even perhaps larger than life. And I think as things get worse in India, which I fully predict will get worse, I think more and more people will wake up. And we don't want to wait for that. We all have to do our thing. So this presentation that I've only briefly shared with you today is a PowerPoint presentation that I will share with all the participants today. And I hope you can add on your own things and share with people to keep emphasizing. Repetition is often very, very necessary. You can't assume that everybody knows it, so why go over the same ground? We have to keep pounding on and repeating that this is not the Hinduism of my friends that I used to went to school with, or this is not the Hinduism of my parents. It cannot be the same as Hindutva. So I would urge you to do that. And I think we will gain traction as we move along.
Thank you, Raju. And if you're in the audience here and you agree with what Raju said, then please join us. Join us if you're Hindu, join us if you're a person who cares about truth and justice. We need to work together. Thank you. Next question, again from Sumbel Zeb, is saying, Kulkarni's Muslim supporters, when we bring up Hindutva, say that his opponent is an Islamophobe, and Kulkarni expresses positive sentiments towards American Muslims. And we have another question further down that says, it's a lifelong, I don't have it right here, but it's a person who says that they are a lifelong Democrat, and what else can they do but vote for Kulkarni? So if you can answer those questions.
Yeah, those are excellent questions. As far as what else can they do, and on that, I don't have an answer for that. I'm here to tell the truth. I'm here to explain that this is the case with this candidate. I can't answer what a voter in that district should do. That's up to them and their own personal conscience. As far as the issue of his opponent, Troy Nils, I believe, being a raging Islamophobe, perhaps he is. And as far as the issue of Kulkarni appearing to express positive sentiments towards Muslims, that's true, and I've seen that. Ramesh Buttada himself, the vice president of HSS, has been in America expressing positive sentiments towards Muslims. He's I believe involved in founding and definitely on the board of a local Houston Muslim group. He has been doing things where he's going out of his way to express positive sentiments towards Muslims. But the question is, are those sentiments sincere? Because while he may be doing that, Buttada, not the candidate, but Buttada himself, may be expressing these positive sentiments, he is deeply involved. He's a key person in the American Song, and the RSS. The RSS has a stated goal of eliminating Muslims from India, and has acted on that goal multiple times over the past 30 years with these pogroms led by RSS, BJP, VHP, etc., which resulted in the slaughter of thousands and thousands of Muslims, for which there was never any justice. And now we've seen that after, for instance, the 2002 Gujarat pogrom, which Modi oversaw to one degree or another, that the only result was that he rose to higher levels of power, became prime minister of the country. And Ramesh Buttada, Modi owes Ramesh Buttada to an extent a debt of gratitude for his success in getting elected. Buttada was a tireless campaigner over a period of years, organizing the OFBJP to support Modi's election from America, and helping to organize teams that were sent abroad, sent back to India to be boots on the ground to campaign for Modi. And this man has a decades proven track record of supporting the most Islamophobic, and not just Islamophobic, but anti-Christian, anti-Muslim, anti-Sikh, anti-minority, anti-Hindu who disagrees with the RSS. He has a decades-long track record of supporting the group that espouses all of that, and helping them to get power in India. So with this man taking such a central role in Kulkarni's campaign, how can Kulkarni be trusted that his positive sentiments of reaching out to Muslims are sincere, and not just what any politician does when they're trying to get elected and they're in 21st century America, where they have to at least give lip service to equality, diversity, multiculturalism, and that sort of thing.
Can I add on to
yes,
what
sure.
Peter said?
Yes.
This situation, or perhaps if you can call it a dilemma among some Muslims, it reminds me of BJP's approach to the Dalits in India. Whereas from a public relations perspective, if you remember Modi's election, while he did absolutely nothing for the Dalits, did nothing to stop the atrocities, before election time, he invited a few Dalit manual scavenger women and washed their feet. Of course, made it tremendous impression on Hindus. Wow, look at our prime minister, stooping down and washing the feet of Dalits. I think we need to, and I'm not comparing that to what Kulkarni said, but I'm just giving you a kind of an analogy of a party that has done nothing in this case, and using elections as more of a symbolic gestures toward Dalits. And I also remember the BJP Delhi got this huge walk, and they were going to create a khichdi for Dalit people of Delhi. And all the BJP who and who's who were there to make a big show of it. And it reminds me of that, but I know that your situation and the person who asked that question is not quite comparable, but please remember to go deeper into it. And another example I can give you is the recent expose on a group called APPWW in Seattle, who were created with all the various symbols of liberalism and multiculturalism and everything else. And this group went into their Twitter accounts to see what the actual conversations that are going on. They're discovered to be majority Islamophobic, majority supporters of Modi, and yet they were accessing and approaching council people in cities to even get funding. And now it has stopped because somebody took the trouble to go into the details and show that everything was just a facade. So I would just urge you to keep that in mind. I have nothing against Mr. Kulkarni. I didn't know much about him until a couple of days ago, but I just want to mention these two examples so that we, individual voters will have to go a little bit deeper and ask themselves if they're going to vote for somebody here who could potentially support policy that could make things worse in their home country. That's what I would say.
One thing I would add to that briefly.
Yes, go ahead.
That I think that whatever candidate, whatever office, whatever their background, whatever affiliations they may or may not have, I think that voters in general, just my perspective is that it would be wise for voters in general to view with skepticism and understand that the people seeking political power are willing to use, to cynically use as props, anybody and everybody for photo ops that help them to obtain that political power. So I would recommend some skepticism.
Okay, now we're really running out of time, and so I'm going to. We're not going to get to all the questions. I apologize to people who are asking questions. We will email everyone after this, and we will send Raju's presentation. We'll send some of your articles, Peter, that you mentioned. We'll get those out by email to everybody who registered. And I'll just club together some of these questions in one last round of questions for both of you. There's questions about Hindutva groups and their impact on politics in Europe. If you can speak to that. Tom McCausland, who we all know, is asking, I want to make sure to ask his question. Let me find that. It's how can we in the UK, US, or Canada effectively persuade ordinary Hindus in our countries to condemn or speak out against Hindutva extremism, Islamophobia, and casteism? And he would like both Peter and Raju to respond to that. And then there's a host of questions about HSS, RSS, and the possibility of getting them banned in the US, and of reporting them to the SPLC, perhaps, as a hate group, if that's some things that we could do. And I think why don't we have those? And then and Raju, when you speak, we're getting some questions about how people can join us and what is next from Hindus for Human Rights that people can expect. So why don't you go first, Peter?
What was that first question?
Basically about Hindutva organizations in Europe, and then how we can address reporting as hate groups and maybe getting banned, those organizations. Somebody has even asked about HAF, about their involvement in all of this. So if you can do a general response to questions around hate groups and Hindutva groups.
Yeah, I would say that that's a very relevant question about the song about these Hindutva groups and their activities in Europe. There was one example about a month ago. The HSS in Munich, Germany, had invited a parliamentarian from the Bavarian parliament to keynote an event, and some local Indian Americans, or some local German Indians took action and contacted her office and just informed her, and she was completely unaware of any of the information about this issue, the background about this issue. As soon as she learned, she backed out. Yes, Hindutva groups are very active in Canada, UK, I would say particularly in Germany as well, and a number of these other countries. I would say the same thing needs to be done there that's happening here, or that we're attempting to do, is to identify them and really start to track their activities and their past activities, and document it, and proceed with working with the local politicians, and then just the local citizens to inform them. Declaring RSS or any of these groups a hate group, or getting them on one of these lists like the SPLC, I think that's a wonderful idea. I don't know if anybody's actually attempted to do that, but if not, they certainly should. That should be an issue that is taken up, and I think that there might be a lot of scope for accomplishing that. Mm-hmm. As far as getting groups banned, I do firmly believe that the RSS is the world's largest and oldest terrorist organization. Well, close to oldest, but certainly largest, and that it should be banned. I believe it should be banned in India. But I believe that it should be declared as a terrorist organization by the US State Department. And in order for that to happen, well, we've already seen a few steps that would be necessary in that direction. A couple of years ago, the CIA in its World Fact Book listed the VHP and its youth wing Bajrang Dal as militant religious organizations. And that's a good first step. But I think that it's possible. I think that it would require a lot of groundwork, a lot of documentation, proof. Of course, the RSS has been involved in essentially every major anti-minority pogrom in India since 1947, and is involved in a host of other incidents of lynchings, assassinations, and all sorts of other violence and intimidation atrocities. And that much of it has been documented, but I think that, there's still more work to do to properly document that in a manner that would be understood by the US State Department. And then there's, of course, the necessary groundwork to actually engage and interact and pursue that goal to have the RSS labeled as such as a terrorist organization. I think it's possible. Mm-hmm. And then, and related to that, I would say that that's one of the issues that I perceive is that, for example, in 2018, when Congressman Krishnamurti was at this event in Chicago, where he was sharing the stage with RSS chief Mohan Bhagwat. Well, why is Mohan Bhagwat able to get a visa to the US? Why are these other RSS executives, and there's many of them who routinely come to the US and tour around, able to get visas? Why are, for that matter, why are these BJP officials who come to the US and tour around for the purpose of indoctrinating the diaspora in BJP ideology and quite possibly fundraising and taking money back to India to support the BJP and so forth, why are they able to get visas? Why is this kind of political activity able to take place on American soil, or on European soil or Canadian soil? And then as far as this question about what can Hindus do to reach out and persuade people to other Hindus not to follow or to reject Hindutva ideology? Well, that's a good question. I'm not a Hindu. I think that question is best answered by a Hindu. I think that's a discussion that needs to be had and is of course happening as here right now. A discussion that needs to be held within the Hindu community.
Yeah. Raju, that's a good segue to you. The questions were that question that Peter just handed over to you, which is actually from a number of people, including Tom in the UK. Yeah. But also, how can people join Hindus for Human Rights, and what are we planning? And somebody wants to reach you, and so just if anybody wants to reach any of us in Hindus for Human Rights, just email us at info@hindusforhumanrights.org, and we'll immediately get back to you. So Raju, if you want to close us out.
Yeah, the 3 or 4 points that I wanted to make, I don't remember all the questions, but as far as how you can help, just go to our website. I think one thing I wanted to mention is Hindus for Human Rights does not mean that only Hindu members are welcome as members or donors. We are Hindus speaking up for the human rights of all communities. So we welcome anybody who wants to join and donate and be part of our work. And please take some time to look at our website for a lot of things we have done in a very short period of 1 year. We have done advocacy in Washington, D.C. We are working with USCIRF, International Religious Roundtable. We have been holding webinars. We have been giving platform to activists from India. And today, I think if you ask me what the next priority would be to shed some light on prisoners of conscience who are piling up in India. Every day we are hearing reports of even ordinary people who participated in the CAA protests being rounded up. And they have made this possible by completely redoing the narrative about the Delhi riots, making it look like it was all a conspiracy by secularists and Muslims. And somebody has even published a book. They probably wrote the book before the riot started, in my view, if I wanted to be cynical about it. So that priority for all of you is to pay attention to what is happening to individual citizens in India under various guises and trumped up charges. And please speak up. Please talk about those specifics to your Congress people. I know Peter mentioned that we shouldn't be relying on it, but at least at the local government level, people are much more receptive when you bring these kinds of issues. So that's the next priority. As far as Europe is concerned, I don't have as much knowledge, but please be aware that we are already working with groups in UK, and we may start working with groups in Europe of similar groups of people who feel so much concern for their homeland in terms of the direction. And our objective is to build an international coalition of not just Hindus, but Hindus and Muslims and other groups who are willing to take on Hindutva and stop it. Speaking of local politicians, I feel that you don't really need to do a lot of research, because you should start with the assumption that they know a lot about India. If you start with the assumption that they know little, even 1 or 2 instances of people in their constituency who are indulging in Islamophobia will really wake them up. So that's what I would urge you to do. And one last thing for Peter, you had mentioned that we already have 200 or so prominent people associated with Hindu nationalism, and I'm sure people in the audience would love to know where they can access that, so they don't have to redo all the research. Perhaps we can address that some other way than talking about it here, but I wonder if you want to respond to that.
Yeah, Raju. So one place you can access that is at my website, peterfriedrich.net.com, where I currently have up and available a list of, I believe, 70 or so actual executives in these Hindutva groups organizations who were donors to Tulsi Gabbard, who I identified in the process of research. Additionally, you can look to the Tulsi Gabbard article that I wrote for Caravan, and that doesn't contain so much a easy, simple list, but the names are scattered throughout. Then one other thing I just wanted to add, as you mentioned, these prisoners of conscience, these political prisoners of conscience. I do want to, if I say nothing else today, I do want to raise my voice on their behalf, especially on behalf of the 12, mostly all academics, social activists, civil rights activists, lawyers, who were arrested in connection with the Bhima Koregaon case. And especially I want to raise my voice in support of freedom for the latest victim of this witch hunt against outspoken voices of resistance, of outspoken dissidents. The latest victim, I want to raise my voice for him, which is Professor Hani Babu from University of Delhi, and just say free Hani Babu.
Thank you, Peter. I think, Raju, you should just close the meeting. I think that those are all the questions we have time for.
Okay.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Peter. We really appreciate the work that you're doing on behalf of all of us in South Asia, and for your excellent presentation. And I thank everybody who joined this Saturday. I hope you will start, if you haven't already started a journey, I hope you will start the journey with us to safeguard democracy and pluralism in India, which for a long, long time we've all taken for granted. And it's going downhill very, very fast, even as we speak. So please do your bit, if not with us, with other organizations that are working on similar issues. And we please do look forward to an international conference, virtual conference that we are planning along with several organizations, where we want to highlight each of the several issues that we've talked about today. It might happen sometime towards the end of September, early October. So we hope many of you will join, and we can see what happens between now and then, and plan on very specific actions, including a prisoners of conscience wall that we are planning to put up, which will be continuously updated and shared with all of our lawmakers in this country, who I see the Congress already has a particular subcommittee that focuses on prisoners of conscience. And what is shocking is I don't see any of these people that we just referred to being sponsored by any Congress people, including the Indian American Congress people. Rokana, for example, is supporting somebody from Saudi Arabia. I think it's time that all of them started to adopt some of these prisoners of conscience, so that we keep them in our minds. So again, thank you all. Have a good afternoon. Please contact info@hindusforhumanrights.org with any further comments. And we will take a look at some of the comments that we were unable to, question that we were unable to answer. If we can summarize some responses to those, we will add it to the email that we will send to all the participants. Thank you, and have a good rest of the Saturday.